What's a mic?
Mr. Ben Caldwell. I don't know how many people here have seen the book. Great. I mean, for people who know Ben, like Ben is, he's always been one of my, if not the, you know how it is. Like if you want to, you're black and you're artists, you always look to. I always look at models, you know. So and most of us have models. So I have models like people who I like, Jimi Hendrix, Coltrane, whatever. But more often than not, those are people you don't know personally, you know. So it's very interesting. You look back at your own trajectory and stuff, and you say, well, who is the person who I actually know in my life who kind of had that kind of impact on, you know, my trajectory, my arc. And for me, that's definitely Ben. He's like literally the first black experimental filmmaker I ever met. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a black experimental filmmaker until I met Ben. And I could actually spend the whole evening just talking about the first weekend that we met. He was doing a job talk at Howard, and it's one of those moments in your life. Like I remember just standing in the door of the. He was showing a film, and I was standing in the door, just looking, and I was like, "Who?" You know, I don't want to use the N word, but who is this nigga? Right? And then we ended up running around, right, for that weekend. Yeah. So, and it's just been really incredible knowing him and seeing like the evolution, you know, of him as an artist and as a community activist and as a thinker, like conceptually and everything. It's just, like I said, I could literally just spend the whole evening talking about things that Ben has said that had a profound impact on me. So, you know, when he asked me to do the talk, I mean, we talk, anybody knows Ben, we talk all the time anyway. So we're just going to try to talk a little bit like in public. Want to say something?
Yeah, well, it's hard to talk about yourself when you're listening to yourself, kind of. But no, on the real side is that when AJ and I, just the experience of Howard, I'm from New Mexico. So imagine landing in 99% blackness. I just bashed in it. I was just swimming in it, enjoyed it. The whole experience was just totally new to me. And to run into a school that I left UCLA and we didn't even have 1-inch machines then. And 1-inch machines were what CBS and ABC were using. The students were using it at Howard as just part of their life. It had a #1 radio station, The Quiet Storms, which really tore my brain up. and I would wake up and say, am I in heaven? This is my playlist playing. And then I would then turn on WPFW, and they said 360 degrees of blackness. I was like, wow. I can listen to Mr. Sunra in the morning from the regular commercial television, radio station. That was just wild. So Coltrane in the morning, you know. So it was just a fabulous experience. And then the students. AJ, I met him when we were on tour with the LA Rebellion folks, and we were showcasing our works at Howard because of Hiley. And Hiley was our TA. Who then ended up teaching at Howard. And as I passed through, the dean asked me if I would like to teach there. And so that's kind of what happened. And AJ walked in at the time that was happening because I was in town staying with the lady friend. Gia.
Gia Kai.
And Gia Kai, yeah.
The Gia Kai from Detroit.
Yes, so... And anyway, the whole group of people that were the real forward-thinking music folks like Bob Wisdom, he's the one that introduced me to Roger Smith here, because I was asking him who's a person that could work with my film that AJ and I met on, because it was called Babylon is Falling, a visual ritual for peace. And I made it a musical piece that was in conversation with the idea of the weed and seed concept of showing us getting our ass whipped and then us showing us whipping ass. So I thought it would be a toe-to-toe hit, some detente going on there. So that's the way I dealt with my media, as a way to heal us, because I could show the horror, our psychosocial horror that we got, and then to have an answer for it in your subliminal sense. And to do that musically. Don't you think Kendrick did a little bit of that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a that's a complicated conversation to get into. I mean, because everybody got so many opinions about it.
That's what I'm loving about it. This is the first time I've heard folks dissect imagery. I've heard them talk about words, but there's a kind of an image literacy that's going on now in the Black community that I'm loving. It's a kind of building up the literacy. They're practicing their muscles of symbology. You know?
I mean, it's definitely some voodoo. I mean, anybody, when, the session they had in LA, I was like, poor Drake, you know what I mean? It's like he's getting slammed on some metaphysical and physical level at the same time. Hey, but you know what? I want to do something just before we jump into it. I mean, it's in the book. You can read it, but I do want to read it, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay, cool.
Ben asked me to do a forward to the book, and it's like, I'm not, for a person who yaps as much as I do, I'm not really much of a writer. But I was like, okay, let me sit down and try to, write this stuff out. So I'm just going to read this to you. It's not very long. It's pretty short. But I just want to read it because it's one of the few things I've written in my life where I was like, yeah, this is like literally it. So, okay, so the life of any artist is inevitably filled with models of different sorts. They are objects, living or still, that one attempts to render. There are artistic works that arrest you in ways both overt and mysterious, and there are the artistic creators themselves. Artistic models, the flesh and blood makers, matter because life is finite. And in the end, we're all stardust. Combine that with the anti-Black universe, and models, particularly for Black folks, aren't just a difference between success and failure, but life and death. It's a minefield out here. So one discovers the work of an artist X. That frames what's possible, sets the terms of excellence. If one is fortunate, you develop some conscious understanding of why the work captured your attention in the first place. If one is blessed, and herein lies the difference between viewers and those with aspirations to become artists themselves, meeting artist X is an opportunity to seek not just answers, but questions. The questions driving artist X, blessing on blessings, become a template for more personal interrogations, the sort one spends a lifetime attempting to answer. Ben Caldwell was my artist X. Meeting and ultimately coming to know him has been an extended hanging with train moment for me. I attended Howard University in the early 80s, and despite having gone there to study architecture, I increasingly found myself in the film department. Plus, I spent my previous 2 years in DC taking advantage of the Circle Theaters, which were at the time the most sophisticated repertoire film chain in the US. That, plus the American Film Institute and the plethora of universities in DC, had given me an opportunity to see some of pretty much everything that cinema had to offer. So when I found myself, and this is that moment I was talking about, standing in the doorway of a studio at Howard University checking out Ben's job talk, I was curious at best, and being the harsh judge that I am, not particularly expecting to be impressed. I couldn't have been more wrong. Seeing I, that's the image of it back there, an African allegory, Ben's 1977 thesis project from UCLA was like being struck by lightning. I quite literally had never seen anything like it. And I can't overstate its impact on me. Its combination of modalities, from the theatrical to ritual performance, interspersed with abstract sequences, was simply overwhelming. It was a fully realized jazz cinema. Plus, I simply had never considered the possibility, much less existence, of a Black experimental filmmaker. There's a sequence in I composed entirely of black and white still images that triggered such a shift in my thinking that I'm still working on this implication 40 years later. Check out my apex if you think I'm exaggerating. There's this staccato montage of images that demonstrated conclusively the possibility of imposing on cinema the feel and flow of black music. For that alone, it's forever on my list of most electrifying moments in cinema. But there was something else, much more subtle, paradigm shifting, that took me a moment to fully grasp its implications. In addition to images of black folks, being used still images of white people in its montages. That was unexpected. How was it black cinema when fully half of its contents were made up of images of white folks? Perhaps from our vantage, it's hard to appreciate how unprecedented this was. Take my word, it does not compute. And I didn't recognize several images, didn't I recognize several images by super famous, super white photographer Diane Arbus? My head exploded. And then he was gone. The following year, Ben was back. He'd been hired, and I naturally fell into his orbit. Over the course of a couple of years, Ben impacted me in more ways than I can even touch on here, but here are a few things. Ben once told me, quote, I used to read the liner notes on jazz albums, and every time I saw the word music, I scratched it out and substituted cinema. My head exploded. He once said, black music is densely codified African philosophy. My head exploded. One winter evening, after having been with the video shoot, we found ourselves schlepping through the snow, having dropped off the gear. Ben invited me up to his apartment and unexpectedly offered to show me this other film he was working on, The Nubian. He set up a projector, and we screened it on the wall of his living room. It's on a very short list, along with like 2001, A Space Odyssey, and Kenneth Anger's Scorpio Rising, of the most memorable, most primordially magical experiences of projected moving images I've had. Ben described his attempt to create a film not simply about a healer, but a film that actually functioned to heal the viewer. And seeing The Nubian made certain fundamental questions explicit. Does cinema have any potential therapeutic value? And how might this work with or against some supposedly artistic value? How might cinema inform or catalyze things like self-sufficiency, well-being, or mutual aid? Why spirituality matters in these endeavors? The Nubian had these color fields. You'd have a character talking, and then suddenly there'd be just red on the screen, vibrating in a certain kind of way. What I came to grasp was the difference between representing something and presenting something, of the possibilities of the concrete yet material dimensions of cinema. Cinema as light, fundamentally. Cinema like rhythm, both the least material but most felt of things. And yet, how these concerns were never mutually exclusive, not an either or proposition. How our way was forever contingent, improvisatory. Being slowly but assuredly taught me how to think. Not only about the task at hand and how to identify the task, but to consider the relationship between the task and mission. How one's conceptualization of a mission overdetermines what enacting those goals might look like. And most importantly, how these questions are long-term marathons rather than sprints. In a way, Ben let me in on a secret. He wasn't just a filmmaker or even just an artist. His was a creative practice profoundly bound up with the lived and specifically spiritual circumstances of Black people's lives. And in doing so, he challenged me to think beyond my drive for success, artistic or commercial, or my still formulated metric of what mastery might look like. Ben showed me a terrain, pointed out the horizon, then sent me on my way. So I can't even begin to scratch how profound an impact, not to embarrass him or anything, Ben has had on me, like for real, man. You know I love you, right? So, yeah. Okay, so but having said all of that, we're here to talk about his artistic trajectory a little bit. Like so much, I read, it was so interesting reading the book because so many things in the book were things that I've heard you mention here, mention aspects of. So it was interesting to see it all put in order. And I know like some of the early things I remember you talking about, and you delve into it quite a bit in the book, is just being a Black person who came of age in New Mexico.
Yeah, I think the thing that the book helped me really see is the whole Western migration of my people from Mississippi and Iowa. And the lace story that we were able to, me and Taj, talk this out with our classes that we put together at each one of these places, like Mississippi, do a deep dive, and we got to think about stuff that I didn't want to think about that Mississippi does to people. It kind of makes you think of Nina Simone. Say, goddamn Mississippi, yeah. Because Mississippi, we're from there, right?
Right.
So so that was an interesting mesh. And then also talking to one of the students that was in the class, and he was telling us about the present day Mississippi, where they would put these young men who hated 1,000-pound bull, and that was their rodeo, to watch them hit and run and act scared, and they would get, so they could do the jigaboo thing with them. Like watch them get big-eyed and cry and chase around. So they would do that to the guys in prison, and so that's present day. So that was one of the things we found out. And then to me, the Western migration of my people being kind of chattel, not kind of, barefoot, pregnant, walking to Texas to chase, to dodge the Confederacy. Not dodge it, to follow it to Texas, right? So those are the types of things. New Mexico, the flooding in Texas was interesting because you then think about it. We learned that a lot of black societies started in deltas, that's the reason that they're flooding. You know, there's historical floodings. They were forced to be in places that are deltas. And so, of course, that happened. Then New Mexico was a part of the kind of migration of my people that were migrant farm workers. And they flooded out and settled and went to a black township that was just outside of Texas, and then started working with the military-industrial complex that was developing there as a part of the war machine that America was getting ready for. And the B-29 bombers were part of it. My father was a part of that. So it was just, I was in utero. I'm an atom bomb baby. So my mom, that Oppenheimer picture, I was one of those villages that was hopefully not downwind from it. Because we were only about 200 to 300 miles away from where they had ground zero there. So so it's a military warrior-oriented society that I was raised in. Jet pilots, I mean not jet pilots because they weren't jets then. The B-29 bombers dropped bombs on Tokyo, Germany, and the atom bomb, right? So all of those came from around my world. The Latinos were in the Bataan Death March, so that legacy is around the feelings of the community. And then they were in the Korean War, so all of that was a part of our world as I was growing up. So yeah, New Mexico helped shape me. But the interesting thing was my grandfather.
Right. I was just going to say that.
Yeah, grandfather really ran a cinema, and he was a real, I call him, I don't like the word that constantly be used as a person who does a lot of things. He wasn't a hustler, he was a worker. He knew how to really focus and work on things around him. So he showed me how to work and not hustle. And I really learned a lot of that, into hustle and not pimp, and do those kinds of cultural things that other kids didn't have to look up to. You know, I had a man, and my father was the same way. My father was a real worker. He didn't keep the jobs because of his anger, because he would get really angry. He couldn't stand disrespecting him, and he was blacker than me, so he was a person who really was in a place where it was hard for him to be as a man. So I watched him struggle as a man there. But my grandfather was able to kind of lasso and work all around all of that stuff, and had a baseball team for the women and men that was and it was multicultural. It had Indians, Latinos, and blacks that bomb-starred the Southwest. He was a projectionist for our hometown, both for the Latinos and then the blacks, for the whites. And then he also was a real story person when it came to the drive-in movies. He was also that. He was also a fireman. So, you know what I'm saying? So he ran a little place like I did with the kids, where he had barbecue and had jukebox and let them handle it. And so that's my grandfather. Yeah.
One of the things being like what I remember, like, I'm gonna try to not keep framing this in terms of how it impacted me, but when I remember you first talking about growing up in New Mexico, one of the things that struck me about it was how non-stereotypical it was. You were both the blackest dude I had met, and I mean that in every way. But at the same time, your history was not a stereotypical idea. Everybody came from Mississippi, and this and that. It's like the way you would talk about just growing up around Latinos. Like, I always had this sense of space. Like when you talked about New Mexico, like looking at the sky at night and what's it like to not, I think that was one of the things I really identified, not growing up in the city, growing up in a place that wasn't densely populated, because I do think so much of the thing with black folks is this a certain kind of relationship to space that's always about constraint in a way, from slave ships on. So the whole idea, even like plantations are like about constraining, you know what I mean? But the whole idea of being in space and being able to experience it is something I always thought, that impacted me when I talked to you. And then I could see it in your work too.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That was something that Taj and I were first talked about, because that passage on Malcolm X, where he would go, I remember reading it, and I was like, he's from the Southwest, and then his mother said that he should take care of a garden, and he would get on his knees and look at the bugs and look at the plants. You can do that kind of focusing when you're in a desert or in a place as a kid. So even as a kid, we had no boundaries. We would tell our parents that we'd be back before the sunset, and we could go to the horizon, We could go to the mountains and chase rabbits. And when it got dark, you could lay down, and it seemed like you could touch stars. It also would be kind of scary, because you're so totally alone there. And if there's no clouds, then the stars are like lasers, and it kind of cuts through you. You can feel it cutting through you. And I think that's what's wonderful about New Mexico. It's really Mother Earth and the air around it are in love with each other. They take care of each other in a way that I haven't seen it in any other place.
Yeah, cool. I remember, just to segue a little bit, a kind of strange segue, but I remember one time I came to LA to work with you on a project, and you met me at the airport, and I was looking for you, and I saw you. I don't know if you remember this. I'm sure you would, but I saw you in the airport, and you were just standing like that, like you were frozen. And I said, "Yo, Ben, what up, man? What up?" And you were just like this, and then you said, "Man, I just seen this brother who I hadn't seen since I was in Vietnam. The last time I saw him was in Vietnam." And you told me, like, I'm gonna repeat what you told me the story. It was one of the craziest things I've ever heard. You say, yeah, this brother's name was Willie O. Williams. Willie O. Wells, okay. And he used to go around and carve his initials into the foreheads of dead Vietnamese. Wow. And you were just like, I saw him, he was a red cap, he was just walking by. And I think of, like, again, damn, man, I could do a 2-hour conversation to just telling stories. You told me about Vietnam, man.
Oh yeah. No, Vietnam is. Yeah, I don't tell that one about Wow as much, but but yeah, no, yeah, that was.
Mike.
Oh yeah, that was really pretty deep. Willie O. Wells, yeah, and I did run into him, and the thing that I'm learning about airports and crossroads,
Right.
because I ran into Willie Sharenka in Detroit there, like.
Who was that?
Wally Sharenka, the Nigerian. Right?
Wally Sharenka.
Yeah, just like we just crossed streets. It's just like, and Babu in the same kind of crossroads. So you run into the wildest people, in these crossroads. So, and I'm a believer of that because that's what the Nubian's about.
Right,
The Nubian's about the crossroads. And the very spiritual way that I'm ingesting my work has that as its major property, is to really go into the spiritual realm, because basically filmmaking's voodoo.
Totally.
You put people under 24 frames a second and you pour in what you want, right? And I want to do health and wellness. I don't want to do violence and killing and rape.
Right. Which is kind of strange in terms of our relationship, because, I have a lot of that stuff in my work.
Yeah. Well, so does, Octavia Butler, know.
Totally.
And so I really see that part of violence as kind of like nature's violence, kind of very similar to an eruption or earthquake, except a natural effect of humans,
I was just having a conversation with somebody who literally just said the conceptual nature of violence in your work, and we started talking about this. So I said to them in response to that, I said, I don't think anything happens that's transformative without blood sacrifice. And in a way, it's like trying to get at that, But I would say this just to say, one of the things that's been so interesting to me about, as I said, thinking beside Ben or along with Ben, is like we don't necessarily always agree, right? We don't, it's not an either or proposition. It's just the sort of quality of delving into things, which it could just be taken as a technical thing. But as soon as you say film is voodoo, you can, the first time you hear something like that, you sort of stop in your tracks. Mm-hmm. But the thing I always loved about Ben is like the ability to then take the conversation beyond that. It's not just like a catchy thing. It's like, damn, this thing is actually thought about this. You know what I mean? Like, what would that mean? How would that play out? Like, I think just for myself personally, it's like I said, it's like the question is critical. It's not even the answer so much. It's just like, these are the questions that one could preoccupy oneself with. And like, in a way too, it's like, I think like from meeting Ben at Howard to moving out to LA and my daughter being born, and then Ben came back out to LA, he crashed with us for a while. It's been this whole life of like coming and going and coming and going. And every time I come back, I feel like those same questions are there, but sometimes something that maybe I didn't totally agree with him, but as I get older, I was like, okay, I see what you meant. I get it, now. So that's been an interesting process for me too, just as a thinker.
Yeah, it took me I remember Beverly Robinson hooked me up with Octavia Butler. They were doing a Wildsea thing at the showing kind of, at that time we called it magic realism, a showcase of people who did work like that. And when I read Walsey, I was like, damn, I couldn't get through the violence. The violence is so hard. And so when I was asked to talk about her work, I really did it with another vantage point, and I saw the European Zeus and Plato, all of those type Mercury, and then you look at the Egyptians and Osiris and the cutting up of the body and
Right.
all these kinds of ways to use these body and human metaphors of destroying each other, and then the changing of that into another kind of matter.
Right.
It's just so to me, they both are like the I Ching. It's like I Ching. It's coming to a kind of homeostasis with human living that we have to go through. And there's toxic poison in our bodies all right now, and it's the balancing of these two forces that makes us seem well. And so I think that I look at it that way, in the sense of nature as a way to follow and emulate what we even do with violence. Because I did watch violence in the middle of it, but I didn't participate. And so just like someone could attack somebody in here, it doesn't mean that you could participate. Some people would and some people won't. And I'm not a participant.
I mean, I'm not gonna do this again, but I'm at least do it one more time.
Good.
The Vietnam thing, like again, the stories you've told me about Vietnam just have like blown my mind. Like, so I'm not gonna start repeating a lot of really. Most of them are kind of horrifying, kind of funny, because you were a member of the Tank Corps, right?
I was a part of a group that was Scouts.
Scout.
It's actually very similar to what you're watching now on TV. Those guys that are on armored tanks where it's like a box looking. It's not like the tanks like Patton had, but the tanks that are used as when they're attacking a beach, and then the back of it goes down and soldiers run out. We used them as RVs. And 5 of us stayed in it, and I had a machine gun for myself, 60 caliber.
I kind of remember you talking about it, and I'm saying it's like consistent with what you were just saying. You would tell me these incredible stories about Vietnam, but it was really about how, and that's part of this that's sort of magical too, how to be in Vietnam, see the craziest shit you could imagine, and not be a participant, in a way, to be like bear witness. Because I always thought like, yeah, he was definitely there to bear witness to things,
Yeah, that's really what I felt, is that I'm a griot, I'm a storyteller. I was able to grab, and I think people saw me that way, I think they guarded me that way because I was here to tell this story to you guys, And they saw that in me, and so that's what because I got to bear witness to a lot of things that was that probably would have been frightening if I didn't have the other part of the angels protecting me,
Yeah.
And so that's also what I discovered in making this book. Was I forgot that we were raised as kids around angels, and I was wondering, where did they disappear? And while I was thinking, I remember telling Taj, while I was thinking about that, I said, well, what angels ever helped me? And then I got a pimp slap across the face and said, motherfucker, do you remember how many ways I've saved your ass? I was like, okay, you're right. Yeah, so let me count the ways, So it was that kind of thing that was a real strong epiphany about what I think all of us have had it. You just don't really go toward it. And whereas in war, you kind of have to, because there's not too many things that you can count on, So yeah, I think the one that I had that was the most wild was our first encounter of almost dying. Is like that same kind of vehicle falling into a tank trap is about like falling into a hole about 2 stories tall. So you're driving up like here and then you fall into it, going about 40 miles an hour. And we were going through elephant grass and it dropped down, and so we were right on top, so it catapulted me in front of the tank. So I look up and the tank's coming toward me, and I go against the wall and pull up and say, I pulled up like some kind of gravity pulled me. I'm on top, and then they're looking down. Ben, are you alive? Are you alive? I was like, hell yeah, I'm up here. What's up? My clothes were torn off and stuff, but it shows what kind of adrenaline goes through you, and the spiritual thing too of someone grabbing, that spirit grabbing you and taking you up. So those are the kinds of stories that I don't tell too much, but it's a part of.
You never told me that one.
Really?
I never heard that one.
Yeah, that was my first near-death experience when we first were there, like the first few days.
I mean, so much of these stories to me are about, it's always this, how we got over.
Yeah.
We like comparing notes.
Yeah.
We spend our whole lives comparing notes with each other. Like, how did we survive to this point? Like you said, doing the book was a process for you of going back and seeing all the ways that your guardian angels and spirits just intervene, because
Right.
the shit don't make no sense.
No, it doesn't.
Like, logically, none of us would be here.
No, it's and then the wildest thing is, to me, the real angels there were the innocents, the children. They had my back. They would even tell me, Ben, I know you. And like through the barbed wire, they would be pointing, got my back, because I had the same view as they did. That that you can. It's see the future, not what's going on right that moment, because the future is in their eyes, not necessarily, all the horror that's going on.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I was reading this book. A friend sent me this book recently called Black Swan. You ever heard this book? It's by economists. And it's a study of the nature of improbable things that happen and how they affect how we understand the world. And the metaphor he uses in the beginning was like in Europe for like so many hundreds of years, everybody said, well, swans are white. That's it. Swans are white. That's just it. And what happened when they saw their first black swan? You know what I mean? Like how does that kind of improbability disrupt or destabilize your understanding of the world? And I think like, in a sense, like black folks are like a flock of black swans. You know what I mean? Like, so, like I said, my whole thing has always been, like, I know when I was at Howard, just like you said, coming from Mississippi, I didn't go to Howard, like, with any sense that I hadn't had the black experience, It's like, if anything, the opposite, I was like, yeah, well, I know so many of my classmates and stuff, they had never had black teachers and things like that, and I was like, well, I grew up on a small black college, on a campus. And so it wasn't thing. But it was really amazing to get there, because what you really saw was, I remember getting into an argument with some British friends of mine, like around the late 80s and 90s, because there was this term essentialism that was going around a lot. And were just saying, they were like, from Stuart Hall's thinking and stuff, they would term themselves the anti-essentialists. And basically what they were saying was that when black people give into these ideas of a black experience, we're in some ways complicit with the black experience. I remember with these sort of reductive ideas of what black people's lives are about. And I remember saying, you guys are confusing you are taking a kind of crude essentialism and imposing it on black people, because my grandmother, say, for example, would never use the term black experience. I can't imagine her. But she would talk about black people, but she never for a second thought if she said or she spoke to the things that in her mind, like Cornel West would say, there's certain things you cannot not know as a black person in America, that was a limit on what your actual experience was. You know what I mean? So Howard was like great in that respect, because you met so many different kinds of black people. who there was a Venn diagram of things that people shared, no matter what socioeconomic situation, urban, rural, the country. I spent my whole life people saying I sound country, maybe less so now than then, but I mean, I can remember walking into rooms and just saying, hey, and everybody in the space stopped and turned around. That's when my accent was really, really heavy. But like to me, again, like I'm saying, the thing to me was like, encountering you was like, I mean, it was just a kind of complexity in your thinking. Like, I mean, the forms of your work to me, that's why I say it's so jazz-like, because there's nothing there, the definition of being nonlinear. You know what I mean? Like they don't go A, B. They're not, like I say, remedial. It's not A for apple, B for ball, C for cat. They jump around in a way. And so I'm really interested in hearing you talk a little about just like formally, technically in your work.
Well, you guys introduced, you and Julie pulled up the cry of jazz.
Right.
And so to me, that best explains my way of working, because like you said, jazz, and I did scratch out all of those and say film, cinema, but with the cry of jazz, the thing that stuck with me was that jazz is the black artist constantly moving in a way that they will never be defined, because once they're defined, they are crucified. You end up with Elvis Presley. You end up with Tommy Dorsey. You end up with Paul Whiteman. You end up with
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson.
Who I love, but he was
True
crucified.
that. Very much so, yeah. Got to meet that man too. He was very, very powerful, but very, very quiet. He introverted type spirit. But yeah, that's the real thing. So my constant searching within this medium is to stop making documentaries and to make snippets of stories. Like these are all snippets of stories and ideas. And I saw myself as like a Zora Neale Hurston, grabbing culture at various times through history that can then be reflected on 40, 50, 100 years from now to show what they thought and felt like and looked like, and we can use those snippets in those ways. So that was the real change for me, and that stopped me from kind of always hunting for money. And then I did this to kind of also make my work that it could exist on multiple platforms and multiple ideas, as opposed to just being a documentary.
Yeah. I mean, it's also interesting, like I said, walking in here, like at one point I say, is that Medea? I pointed, I haven't seen that in 30 years, I guess, And I've known you since 81, maybe, 80, 81. So I've known you over, 40 years? Yep, I do. It's so interesting. I can remember the times I spent in the studio with you while you were editing, because Ben was sometimes we had three things going at the same time. And it's interesting to be 40 years later looking at these things, because they have cured in a way. It's interesting to see a person taking snippets of things, different things, and putting them into order, and you say, oh yeah, I get it. I can see the formal beauty of the order. It would be like looking at Basquiat's paintings now. In the moment, they were just like, you see this, but then you look back at it 10, 20 years later, they just have settled. Like they say, like my dad always made the gumbo. Oh, I remember on that one. make the gumbo, he was saying when the challenge was always to not eat it up in the first 2 days, to let it sit for a second because all the stuff was settled. And I feel like looking at the work here, that's one of the things that comes to mind to me, like, wow, dang. You know, I remember when you put some of these things together, but they've settled in a way and they have a kind of Parthenon kind of, you know what I mean? It's just sitting there. They don't feel like, to me, like the best work to me, it's not trying to prove anything to anybody. It's not trying to even necessarily convince you of anything. It's just asserting where it's standing, you know, so.
Yeah, and letting each tool be the tool that they are, because like even these, you know, each of them express different time periods of a media work, you know, but then it's captured in a digital form now, but they were all like off of video that, what do they call that when it goes sideways?
When it's what?
When media goes sideways, I forgot when it goes across the screen, you know, the development way that it shows.
You mean when it's like artifacts and things?
No, when the tape goes across the machine. Anyway, it pulls across and you can see the artifacts because the scratches go sideways,
right.
Whereas digital, it's just dots.
Right.
You know, and then you see that with
Yeah,
these up here,
exactly.
where those artifacts are things that you can't get.
I mean, it's like when you see anybody over a certain age, you see a record album and you see the circles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anybody who grew up where you had a stack of record albums leaning on the floor or something understands that now. But like, that doesn't really, you know what I mean? There's no reality to that anymore because there's no even physical artifact to make an impression. So all those little things, like you were saying, those flickers and things become almost like that in a way. Like they both lock down the thing in a particular moment in time, like nails, you know, in Kesey figures, they had nails driven into them. But it still floats above that. So it's both in a period and not in a period at the same time. So,
Yeah, I like playing around with that. You know, I like playing around with the idea of even pedestrian video. You know, why does it, you know, let pedestrian video be pedestrian? You know, capture it through a pedestrian eyes, you know, and it ends up being just like if you're drawing with charcoal or pastels. Each of them have their own flavor, and that's the way I see media, and that's really what my style is just let it be like the blues, you know. That's the example that I use as my metaphor. Like I say, the cry of jazz, but the blues is my real metaphor if we had waited for an instrument to play, we would never have had music in this country, because I was around a place where they would use a broom with a wire that holds the top, hammer it down on a porch, and then on the other porch, and you have a bass, boom, 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 and you could talk and sing over it. So, and if you don't have enough money to make the piano right, you play the tunes in between it, and you make the sound. You use your body, you use your feet. All these different forms, you don't have it stop just because you don't have the instrument. You know, you create by any means necessary.
I mean, it's funny, while you were talking, almost jumped up from the seat because there was an edit. There was like Marley was there, he was talking.
Yeah.
And then they cut to this black and white stuff with all this stuff going around. And I was like, you know, because I feel like, to me, my whole thing is like, I feel those things like, you know, like a great breakbeat or something. It's like, and so I wish if I could have, I would have stopped it and rewinded it back so people could see like that particular instant, you know.
And then also that instant with sound, it also has that warble in it, you know.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
So we're about over, huh?
5 minutes. Dougie Fresh. Well, okay, 5 minutes. What, I don't know how to, you know, it's funny. I was really interested in your photography just in the last.
My photography.
Yeah, your photography. Yeah.
My photography. Yeah. Well, I developed. I just shot in the Army. When I was in the Army, I started shooting just because I knew it was something going on that was unusual, that I needed to have it captured. And so I started with a Brownie camera and a Polaroid. And then when I went to the hospital in Japan, I started falling in love with the cameras that they had there. And then I bought a Yashica 35, and I came back and I started documenting all my friends, the people around me, the whole thing that was going on there, because I knew that it was important. It's probably because of just being in a movie house. Then when I came out of the Army, I went to business first. I thought I wanted to pay for my life, and so I took business classes, and then I took art classes on the side, and I had a still photography teachers. Alan Dutton was a really impressive teacher to me because he shot naturalist desert scenes, and I learned a lot from him. And Eric Kronengold were some of our teachers there. I also had a wonderful silk screening stylography teacher in Rip Woods, who was a black teacher who really gave me my foundation on how to present myself as an artist. I thought he was really, really powerful in how he ran his class. And then I had Mr. Eugene Grigsby, who was also an artist who helped guide me to UCLA. And it was my still photography that got me into UCLA. I turned that in. And at that time, I call myself painting light. So what I did was it was the wildest one. I had a job as working at Baker's Shoes, and Baker's Shoes has, for Easter, you could paint all these different colors shoes that would match the dress. And so I said, let's try this out on my film. And I tried it, and it was so luminescent and beautiful. So that work divided me from the crowd because there was no paint on film that they had at that time. And it was highly absorbent, and it didn't have the plastic sheath on it that it does now. So it made it really absorbent. So I did a whole series of one-of-kind pictures that UCLA saw them, and I got a full ride out of it to go to film school. So it was my still photography that got me there.
One of the things I will say about your photographs is like they're not naturalistic. And that seems like a kind of obvious thing to say, but particularly Black artists coming out of the 60s and, the moments prior to that, to the 70s, like one of the things I think is like, when I was a kid, if I heard a Black person was a photographer, I immediately assumed they were like a photojournalist. You know what I mean? It's like, it was almost like Toni Morrison was on Charlie Rose one time, and she was talking about how insulting it was when people would read her books and say, oh, you have a character getting raped. Did that happen to you? And she would be like, no, I imagined it. You know what I mean? It's something about how Black people were sort of just almost unconsciously stuck in this mode of being documentary. I mean, in the most narrow sense of it. Like things happened to us, but we couldn't happen to the world. Like we will always just be like raw experience. And so like even to put paint on a photo is moving it from that. You know what I mean?
Well, it was highly revolutionary for them. That's
Mike, right?
Yeah, it was highly revolutionary for the school because they were black and white purists, and they dealt with the grayscale and all of those things. And I did it first. Well, I shot roots and dirt and rocks just like my friends were doing, but I was like, I didn't feel it. It just wasn't any feeling. So we started, and so if I shot roots and stuff, then I made it an experimental picture. I had colors and designs with it and stuff like that. And I shot some like that. But when I shot humans, I was shooting them in accordance to nature. So that whole series that I did was the first series that I did was people, black bodies in the desert, because I thought that our skin color was very similar to dirt, and the bushes looked like our hair and our underarms and our bush, And so I thought that the forms, the body, and playing with that up against real nature in black and white was really fun. And then I used color to divide the things as I wanted to in that world. And the piece that we have on the cover of this book was really the first photograph that I did. If you just look at the square one here, that I did was a self-portrait that I did for my first photograph for the art school. And the teacher says, I think you got something there. And so you should go more toward still photography than going toward painting, because I was an artist and I wanted to be an animator at the time. So,
I mean, like, that sounds like such a simple thing when you say, oh, you put these bodies in relationship to, dirt and bushes and things like that. But to me, the thing about it is it's really about, like, sometimes people can compliment you in ways that are about making you stay where you are. Like they'll fix you there.
Right.
And it's like the ability to always see, like, in a sense, latent potential. Like, even in, like, I love this great analogy. They were saying, the first black person who got an electric guitar as opposed to an acoustic guitar, and you plug it in. And the first time you plug in a guitar, particularly early amplified guitars, you know what it's gonna do. It's gonna feed back. Like, anytime you went to an assembly in high school and you plugged in this thing, it's gonna feed back because those are cheap systems. But it's like in that moment is where black people excel. Like, do you stop and fix it? Or do you say, oh, that was dope. How do I integrate that into, my thing, as opposed to just whether it's scratching, whatever. It's constantly what we do over and over and over again. So, and I just feel like your work is it's like an encyclopedia of that, of like not being limited by where you are, but always moving, trying to move it to the next thing.
No, it reminds me, I was with my physical therapist the other day, and we have this little machine where you push it, and it made this. I said, damn, I want to copy this and take it to some of my sound guys with Project Boat and see if we can remix it. And I was telling the physical therapist that, and she says, yeah, I'm a violinist, and so I remember when they I first went to a school that they had us grab sounds like that. That was quite unique, and it made me think outside the box than the violin. So, I mean, I think that's really where my head is to really see, as my ancestors did, in a way, except to translate that into film and television and do it and have fun with it and not make it like begging for your help or begging for needs or making it like what they call the blues or those types of things. I'm not sorry about where I've been. I accelerated and I loved every step of what I'm doing, So that's the way I see it. I'm not mad about it.
Ben Caldwell.
Yeah.